Nicholas Moreano to the Windy City Breeze. My guy Nick always coming with some great content, always coming with great questions in the press conference. Nick, what's going on, my guy? How you feeling?
I'm pretty good, man. Still kind of getting back from the Senior Bowl and lack of sleep there, but I'm excited to be on with you, man.
Listen, I'm glad to have you here. Had to bring you in to talk about the Senior Bowl. I want to get to that here, but I want to get your take on this coaching staff. I just talked about some of the people that could come in with the coaching staff, but Ben Johnson, Dennis Allen, Declan Doyle, they retain Richard Hightower. Me and you were both up there asking Flus and a lot of these coaching staffs questions last season, and you just left your head. You left every press conference almost scratching your head. How do you feel about these guys right now? I get it, we're still in the honeymoon phase, but it seems so different.
It does seem a lot different, and let's start with a guy like Dennis Allen. I think that was a really important hire for a first-year head coach in Ben Johnson. Just getting somebody that has been a head coach before, but has had some credibility in this league for what he's done defensively with the Saints. And I think it'll just be, you'll see him utilize some of these Bears playmakers on the defensive side of the ball, I think in a better way than what was happening with Flus was here. Like a guy like Jalen Johnson, like Dennis Allen is not afraid to let his number one corner go shadow guys.
Yeah.
And when you see Jalen Johnson, you want to get more out of that guy because he wants the team's best opposing matchup. So I think you'll even see somebody like that be better utilized. And we know he likes to use these bigger defensive ends. So, Montez Sweat would fit that prototypical mold that Dennis Allen would like. So maybe get somebody opposite of him to go, create some havoc. I heard you talking about Khalil Mack a little bit there, and that would be enticing, man, to have those two guys at the end and see what they could do together. But Dennis Allen, I think, was a huge get. And then a guy like Declan Doyle, obviously very young, but everybody I talked to at the Senior Bowl that overlapped with him, they're like, it's 2 years too late for him to be an OC. Like, he would have been 26 as an OC. Like, dude's 28 right now. He's super young, but a lot of respect for Declan Doyle, how he approaches his business and being the right-hand man to Ben Johnson. Just get him in the film room, allow him to kind of grind out that tape and see what how he can be an asset to Ben Johnson. So I'm not we'll see with Declan. And obviously you're not going to, like, how much of an impact is he going to have in terms of, Ben Johnson play calling? It's wait to be seen, but I did like the hire. I mean, look, I am an Iowa guy, just going to put that out there. Declan and I, we actually overlapped when we were at Iowa. I obviously didn't know him at the time or didn't know he was going to be, the future OC of the Bears, but we'll see how he can create a positive impact for Ben Johnson. Then Richard Hightower, I think, was a key just keep for the Bears. I think that's a guy that knows the roster, knows how to utilize those guys. Obviously, you saw what he did in the game against Green Bay and setting people up like Josh Blackwell to go, get that 92-yard touchdown. But I think it was a nice addition for Richard Hightower to be retained. He knows how to get the best out of Cairo Santos. And, obviously with Torrey Taylor, his guy there, like, you want to see him continue to, obviously get better and some more consistency with Torrey. But yeah, I think overall we are in the honeymoon stage, and once games are played, we'll see how these coordinators really do.
That's what it all comes down to, right? I remember walking in early, and we're like, Flus has a little bit of a different confidence in him. Look at that beard, man. This guy's got it. And halfway through the season, we're like, he could have shaved it. He could have just left the beard off. You should have. Nothing changed. The big talk, the reason I wanted to have you on was because you were down at the Senior Bowl. And listen, Bears down there, they're scouting people. I saw and I heard from a bunch of people, there was some really, really exciting things offensive line-wise. Dare I say, and I'm not the biggest running back guy, but even running back-wise down there. Let's start off with the O-line because I think that's the biggest thing that everybody's focused here with the Bears. I've said on the show, Nick, this is the only city that cares who the offensive line coach is. Like, the only city that cares who the offensive line coach is. So when you look at some of the O-linemen that we saw down there, what were your thoughts on some guys that maybe stood out, that maybe climbed the ranks for you a little bit?
Yeah, even before against some of the players like Ian Cunningham, Ryan Poles, they were there on day 2 and day 3 at those practices, and a lot of their attention in the trenches, watching those offensive defensive line go at it. So there was a hyper focus there for the Bears brass to kind of just look and see what the talent was. Does it mean they're going to draft one of these guys? Who's to say? We'll have to wait until April to see if that happens. But there was a heavy emphasis on them just focusing on the offensive and defensive linemen. But in terms of guys that I think raised their stock, North Dakota State's Gray Zabel. This is a guy that throughout the reps in the one-on-one period line up at left guard, at center, at right guard. And right now, the Bears could use guys at all three of those positions. So I think Gray's given himself more opportunities if Ryan Poles elects to go with a guy like that. But I think he was arguably the most consistent player on all 3 days, really stacked up well against the tougher level competition coming from an FCS school. But you wouldn't know it just based off how he was blocking, how he was moving his feet, using his hands. So Gray Zabel's, I think, definitely a guy to keep an eye on. I also liked looking at, again, another small school guy, and maybe people are, thinking Braxton Jones, don't want any part of that, but they just kind of kept standing out. So, regardless
I'm not
of where
mad
they
at
played,
it. I'm not mad at it.
Yeah, not mad, but it's like that's what they showed at Alabama A&M left tackle, or he was playing left tackle there at the Senior Bowl. But Carson Vincent, 6'6", 314 pounds, good size, athletic, can move his feet. He had I think what was really telling is that he had one of these reps against one of the better standout defensive ends in Texas A&M edge rusher, Shamar Stewart. And when I see Carson Vincent able to, one, move with a guy that is pretty athletic and win that rep, but also do it in a way that you could project him at the NFL level, using his feet well, using his hands well, that kind of stands out, especially, again, being a lower level school going up against a guy from Texas A&M. That really stood out. But those are just two of the guys that I thought really raised their stock. I'll also throw in another one, Jackson Slater, Sacramento State. Again, another one of these smaller school guys, but
this is where they're supposed to be.
Yeah. This is the good opportunity for them when you get into the Senior Bowl. You're facing obviously the best senior, and now allowing undergraduates into Senior Bowl to just showcase what you're all about. And the one-on-one drills, the team settings are a good way to stand out above the rest. So Jackson Slater, Carson Vincent, Gray Zabel did some good things for the draft stock.
Now, I've heard we talked about Gray Zabel a little bit on the show here, and he's the one that seems to have the world taken by storm right now, right? Again, this is just practices. These are just one-on-ones, but what was it about him? Was it the pure versatility and dominance at every spot that stood out? Was it the fact that he could do a little bit of each, right? Was there one that seemed that stood out? Like, what was it about him at that moment that just kept catching everyone's eye?
Well, I think the big thing, it was that versatility. It's like you see him have a good rep at left guard. All right, okay, make note of that. Then the very next time, obviously going through the cycle of guys going through their one-on-ones, now he's lining up at center. It's like, okay, how's he going to do here? Snap the ball, block the opposing defensive lineman, and then you wait. And again, right guard, it's like, okay, this guy, regardless of what side he's on, where you have to change your position of your feet or your hand placement, he's consistent with it. And that's a big thing with these reps. It's like, can you be consistent with your wins, how you're going to go against these defensive linemen? And I think that's what really stood out with Zabel. It's like each one of these days, he's just stacking practices. And that was not the same for, a lot of other guys where maybe they had a slow start, where you're getting acclimated to all the different coaching, all the different players you're working with or you're going up against. But no, Zabel, from start to finish, these 3 practices in Mobile, Alabama, he was consistent. I think that's what really stood out for him, just the consistency of how he played regardless of where he lined up.
Yeah, it sounds like he's the one that just everybody was like, okay, that's somebody we have to keep an eye on. And when I saw his name pop up, I knew him at, you watch it. I liked Colorado this year, so I got to see North Dakota State. Like, yeah, he was a monster, but is it versus that top competition? It's good to see that he was able to do it versus some of that bigger name competition there. Offensive line is going to be huge for us, but we got problems on both sides of the trenches. Was there anybody on that defensive line that really stood out to you that you thought, okay, maybe Bears need to take a flyer on this guy?
Yeah, so just when I was looking at these defensive linemen, I also looked at them through the eyes of like Dennis Allen and what he's looking for in some of these edge rushers, these bigger type of guys.
Yeah.
Shamar Stewart from Texas A&M fits that bill, being 6'6", 290. He didn't have a lot of production in 2024 in terms of sack production, only 1.5 sacks, but played with a lot of energy, showed some bend around the corner, had a really nice rip move on some of the reps he was having in the one-on-ones. But this is a guy that, looking at him, yes, he may not have the production in college, but can you project him to do more at the NFL level, especially with that size? Like, that's something that you potentially just take a flyer on because he has the physical traits that, some other guys just don't have. So Shamar Stewart was someone that definitely stood out to me. Toledo's Darius Alexander. This is he plays mostly on the interior, but there were a couple reps where he lined him outside and he's fluid enough, quick enough off the line of scrimmage. We're like, oh, okay. If you're a defensive coordinator, how can you get creative with a guy like this? Because he's coming off the line of scrimmage with enough get off the snap, but quickness as well, where I think, it's just the eyes of the beholder with a guy like Dennis Allen. Like, how could he use a guy like that? But he was really consistent in the one-on-ones, showing some power, using the rip move as well. But I think I just put in my notes every day that I was watching disruptive. And I think the Bears could definitely use a couple of those guys. And then one last one I do want to highlight. Maybe he's not the prototypical mold that the Bears will look at it in terms of a defensive end position, but it's UCLA's Olafemi Oladejo. It's a handful to say, but
that was impressive.
Guys, yeah, I have it all like hyphened out, so I knew exactly how to do this one. 6'3", 250, but impressive with the one-on-ones. A little bit raw in terms of like what he was doing at UCLA, and I think still learning the position. But when you see a guy like that utilize a perfectly executed spin move, and then on the very next rep, he's in coverage on a running back and is running stride for stride with those guys, you're like, oh, okay. Like you're an athletic freak. And I think we just need to, polish some things up. But if we do that as a defensive coordinator, I think you can find a lot of production out of a guy like Oladejo.
Yeah, listen, the thing I love about the Senior Bowl is you find guys late in the draft. It is where we found, Braxton Jones. And again, everybody relax, everybody breathe, right? Braxton Jones was good. It was a good pick when we first made it. The problem was you kept trying to say he's the guy at left tackle, and now you're like, all right, now this clearly isn't working. But you find guys like that down there. Were there any of those guys that you looked at and you saw the hype, and you were like, he could be a nice piece if Ryan Poles realizes he's a depth piece?
Ooh, yeah, good question. You know what? When I'm thinking of like players that could be a nice depth piece, like we were just kind of talking about the running back position.
Yeah.
Right. And, I don't know how Ben Johnson feels about DeAndre Swift, Roschon Johnson, knowing what he had in Detroit.
It kind of feels like we know what he feels about DeAndre Swift. Seeing as how his rookie year, he's like, get him out of here.
Yeah, no, it's a good point. So when I'm looking at guys that maybe it's more than a depth piece, but more of a contributor, I'm looking at guys that can have an impact in the passing game. Like when you look at Jahmyr Gibbs and how he's able to impact opposing defenses, like he can do it on the ground, obviously, but he's a play threat when you line him outside or get the ball in his hands in space. And Delaware's Marcus Yarns kept on making play after play. And like when you're in one-on-one with linebackers, it's a really tough drill for the linebacker. There's so much space to work with. There's no pass rush, things like that. But I'm just watching how he moves. Fluid. Very, very fluid. Knows how to run routes. And I got a chance to talk to him after one of the practices. And, I prefaced like, hey, I cover the Bears, Ben Johnson being the head coach. Are there any guys that you mold your game after or see at the NFL level? And one of the guys that he likes to think that have some similarities is a guy like Jahmyr Gibbs. I'm like, okay, that would fit if, you were to come over here to Chicago and what Ben Johnson could potentially do with you. But very fluid mover and soft hands. I just think like if you're thinking of playmakers that you can find later in the draft, I know a lot of Bears fans are fixated on maybe Genty at 10. Like, I don't know about, like, I was just talking with Herb Howard not too long ago. Like, I don't think that's the move here. That's a luxury pick, if anything, but you can find some of these running backs in a deep class.
Nick, listen, we here at the Windy City Breeze are tired of hearing of Ashton Genty. Listen, and it sounds like hate, dog. This is what I don't want to go. It sounds like hate. But people look at Jahmyr Gibbs, they look at Saquon Barkley, they look at Derrick Henry, and they go, that's what we missed out on. They don't look at the fact that Derrick Henry ended up injured, even though he was having a great season the year before in Tennessee because he didn't have an offensive line. They don't look at the fact that I think Saquon Barkley's yards per carry after a 2,000 yard from scrimmage season, his rookie year, ended up being like 3.9 yards per carry because they didn't have an offensive line. His first year in Philly, He's almost the leading rusher in NFL history if they let him play the last game. Like, it's not hate on Ashton Jeanty. I think he's a good player, and I think he'll be good at the NFL level. But the Senior Bowl is where I'm looking for my running backs. The Senior Bowl is where I'm looking for guys that are going to, because I want Ryan Poles to look at the big colleges and say, oh, you played this well against the best of the best on the offensive line? Perfect. I need you, versus, hey, were you a great running back? What can you do behind the FCS left tackle who is probably getting pushed over at this point? Not to say that these guys can't take that next step and be good players here, but when I hear Ashton Jeanty, I'm so nervous, because every time Ben Johnson talks, he goes, you got to start it off with the running game. I'm like, he's going to draft a running back very early.
And look, Bears fans, I think it would be a very polarizing pick to take a guy. And I get it, super talented, but DeAndre Swift also had a career year behind the Eagles offensive line.
Yeah.
Saquon Barkley has had a historic year behind that Eagles offensive line. Like, it makes a difference. And if you draft a guy like that, you still got to build up the line to allow him to be the best version of himself. So I would be pretty shocked if that first round pick is not somewhere in the trenches, but we'll have to see how Ben Johnson, Ryan Poles kind of collaborate there to get the guy that they ultimately see fit.
Well, let's finish it out with this, because I appreciate your time and you taking the time out to come on the show. Was there anybody that you saw that may change what the Bears want to do at the top of the draft? Of course, Gray Zabel, like I said, has been the hot name, but we've just said you're either going Kelvin Banks Jr. or you're going Will Campbell. Those are the only two moves that the Bears are going to make. Maybe one of my co-hosts here on the Windy City Breeze, Jordan JC, said maybe you trade back, you go get Josh Simmons, who's been a pure left tackle but dealt with some injury. We keep saying they're going line, and offensive line specifically. Did you see anybody down there that maybe the Bears would go, okay, if we get him late, we may be able to do something different with this first round pick?
I would think it might be one of the edge rushers that if you're looking at, maybe you can get one of these guys in the middle tier rounds. And, I guess it's all going to be how these teams evaluate some of these guys. I saw somebody in the chat put in Princely, not even going to attempt the last name out of UCLA, but he was a guy that really popped off as well. But like I just said, like Toledo's Darius Alexander did. So did Shamar Stewart. Like, Mike Green is another one who had, that was probably the greatest one-on-one rep, most violent, like where he just bulldozed Connerly from Oregon, who's supposed to be a projected day 2 pick. It was the most violent thing I'd ever seen. Like, those are the type of guys where you're looking, if you're Ryan Poles, like, oh man, it's enticing. Like, can I get one of these guys later on and, still end up with a offensive lineman that you feel is going to be a capable day 1 starter? That's where I would see it. But, obviously the Senior Bowl definitely has talent, but there's still some of these really good players out there that obviously are not participating in this that may be better suited for that 10th overall pick. But I think a lot of guys did raise their stock, like Gray Zabel. I don't know where Gray Zabel was before, this past 3 days, but it sure does feel like he's going to be a day 2 pick and probably be one of the earlier guys picked on that day.
Yeah. Now that is the hilarious part. It's like a guy that almost was not on your radar. All of a sudden it's like, well, this guy's a top 41 pick in the draft. It's like, how'd that happen? That was a day later. But we'll see what ends up happening. Nick, I appreciate you taking the time out to come on the show, man. Of course, follow Nick over on Twitter at Nicholas Moreano. Let them know where else you're at. You got the YouTube channel cracking now, man. You've got so much stuff that you're doing with the bigs, man. Let the people know where they can find you at, dog.
Yeah, so definitely I'll put everything on Twitter at Nicholas Moreano, but the YouTube page also is where you're going to find where, I'll make my own videos, but Herb Howard and I, we're collaborating, doing some things. So
I loved it.
You can follow at Nicholas Moreano, and then, at the bigs, like we're still putting out content over there as well. So it's been fun. And as you know, like the Bears keep us busy. So we'll have everything up to date with everything that's going on with the team.
They always keep us busy, man. Nick, thanks for stopping by. We'll talk to you later, man.
Yeah, appreciate you.
Have a good one.